It's Tuesday, March 24th at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the dogs and I are down on the Cataraqui Trail heading over to the K&P Trail just south of Harrowsmith. It's cloudy, getting breezy, and 2 degrees, so quite cool compared to this morning when it was sunny and calm. Over the last year or so, concern has been growing among the local communities here in Southeastern Ontario, and I believe through South Central Ontario as well, due to the fact that the federal government is proposing a mega project that will span from Toronto to Quebec City, and this is known as the Alto train. Just what is the Alto train? The Alto train is a proposed high-speed electrified railway to span from Toronto to Quebec City, with stops along the way in Peterborough, Ottawa, Laval, Quebec, Montreal, and then Trois-Rivières before it gets to Quebec City. And as you can imagine, this is a mega project, and a lot of people are concerned about the impacts this may have on their local communities, their local natural environment, land usage, and land values. Now, the government is proposing this as a means to combat climate change to some degree at least. Obviously, they feel there's a need for increased transportation into the future as well, but they feel that this, being an electrified system, will help offset carbon inputs into the atmosphere. I should say at the outset that I'm coming in on this project a little late. A lot of people in the local area have been very busy and involved in various meetings that the proponents have held in different townships and counties. I haven't managed to make it to any of those, so I'm getting this information sort of secondhand from a lot of comments from those people, as well as information that the government's put on the websites and whatnot. So while I've done a bit of reading on the background of all these things, it's certainly not all-encompassing information, so I may even have some of my information incorrect. I've tried to verify it a couple times at least. So there are going to be 2 parallel tracks running from Toronto to Quebec City through those different cities I mentioned. These tracks will be very close together, and they'll be situated in a 60 to 80 meter right-of-way for the most part. So 60 to 80 meter wide area that's been cleared and had the tracks put in there. So this area of land, 60 to 80 meters wide, and I've used 80 meters just to be safe, times 1,000 kilometers, will use up an area of 19,700 acres. So quite a large chunk of land will be lost to this project. So at this point, it's proposed that the tracks themselves will be laid at existing ground level for the most part. Therefore, they will run across the landscape in a flat fashion, and wherever they meet secondary side roads or smaller roads, they're just going to cut right through the roads. Therefore, the roads that they cut across will be dead-ended roads. They'll become dead ends. And as you can imagine, that's going to cause a lot of concerns from local communities. There will be large fences on each side of the tracks to keep animals off them. Since it's a high-speed rail system, you can't afford to have any larger animals coming on. So it's estimated at this point that there'll be 30 trains running each day each way. So that would be a total of 60 trains, 30 from Toronto and 30 from Quebec. And I don't know how many people will be on these trains, maybe say 200. So 200 times 30 is 6,000, so double that, so 12,000 people per day, potentially. I guess that just brings up one question in my mind is, will there be a need for moving 10 to 12,000 people a day from Toronto to the other places, or Quebec to the other places? I don't know. It seems like a lot to me. I'm not sure there's a need for it, especially when there's all these other means of travel that will probably be much cheaper. Along with the tracks and the associated infrastructure to build the project, there will be train stations at each of the hubs that I've mentioned previously. Not sure what they will look like, but they'll have to be a fairly significant structure. And I've just read information today that indicates that Alto and Cadence, who are partners in this project, will be requesting landowner information to go onto their lands in areas where there's a potential for the train to come through. So in the corridor areas that have been shown on the maps, some of those landowners will be getting requests for the companies to go on and study their lands in various details for various features. So I've read estimates that the project is supposed to cost from 60 to 90 billion dollars, but some people say it could go twice that, up to 120 billion. I guess my first concern, and others have expressed this as well, I'm sure, is just, has it been validated that there is a need for this project? It's nice to talk about trying to turn over a new leaf and head towards green energy by using electrified systems like this. But what about the impacts that building this system is going to make? And also, is there really evidence that there's going to be thousands of people every day wanting to hop on this high-speed train from Toronto to any of the hubs and from Quebec to any of the hubs? Because I suspect it's going to cost quite an amount to have a ticket on this train. And also, people now can drive to a lot of these places fairly easily in a matter of 2 or 3 hours or less. So I just don't know. And if you want to go from Toronto to Quebec or vice versa, most people would fly, probably get there in an hour. And on a high-speed train like this, the environment's going to go by very quickly because you're moving at 200 to 300 kilometers an hour. The other major concern I have, along with many others, is just the amount of destruction of natural habitat this is going to cause. Just as a comparison, Frontenac Provincial Park, which is one of our premier parks here in Eastern Ontario, has 13,000 acres of land. So this project will consume about 6,700 more acres of land than just Frontenac Provincial Park contains. So that's a huge impact. And it's just really something that we can't lose sight of, especially when this is being proposed as a project in support of green energy. Specifically here in Eastern Ontario, as well as in many other areas, this track will cut through areas of significant forest, significant woodlands, significant wetlands, significant wildlife habitat, and probably the habitat of species at risk in various places. There's a whole slew of natural heritage features that this track will undoubtedly impact. Now, specifically here in this area, we have the Frontenac Arch Biosphere Reserve just off to the east of us here. It's also known as the Frontenac Axis. And the Frontenac Axis, or the Frontenac Arch, is the southward extension of the Canadian Shield into the Adirondack Dome in northeastern United States into New York State. Now, this area of Canadian Shield going south into New York State has been largely kept intact because of its rough and tumble character and hard bedrock. And upon the Frontenac Axis, many of the habitats and ecosystems still remain largely intact. So to now put a huge mega project possibly slicing right through there would have a very serious impact. If this track cuts through the Frontenac Axis, it's going to dissect the axis in two with its fences, and wildlife such as mammals, reptiles, and amphibians will no longer be able to go from one side to the other. And that's a very significant impact, because in order for them to maintain their diverse gene pools, the ability to breed in both areas, the ability to get over to different areas to feed at different times of the year when they may need to, that's all going to be restricted. There'll now be populations living north of the fence and populations living south of the fence. And that's never a good thing, to fragment habitat like that. So as I walk along the K&P Trail here, I realize that this trail will also be impacted by the proposed new Alto train. That railway will have to cut across here somewhere, and in so doing will probably sever it, so people can no longer go along the length of it, they'll just get stopped at one position and then have to turn around. And that's sad when this trail has become such a valued resource for the local community, stretching from Kingston up past Charbot Lake and all the way up to Calabogie area. Part of the consternation, I think, with local citizens is that this area from Peterborough to Ottawa, that area of the track, has two different corridor options proposed, at least on the broad mapping they've put out to this date. In this area, the southern route, as it's called, comes south of Verona and then down maybe 10 kilometers, I'm not sure, south of there. And then there's another route further north up towards Highway 7. And those are the two potential corridors that the companies have put out to say this is where the track may go. So obviously all the landowners in those areas are really uncertain now as to where this thing may end up. So all of them are almost feeling like, hey, this is likely going to come in my backyard. What are we going to do? Even though it may end up 10 or 20 kilometers away from them in the end, if it ends up anywhere. But so anyhow, that just has caused a lot of angst in the communities and concerns. So you can understand that for sure. So a lot of people are simply asking themselves, what happens if this thing comes through our property? Whether you have a small acre lot with a single house somewhere, or whether you have a huge farm, 500 or 600, 1,000 acres, doesn't really matter. It could impact you severely. In the case of a farm, the track may come through the middle of your farm, split it in two, making access to the other part of your farm very difficult because all the local roads will be cut in half too and dead-ended, making it all very difficult or impossible. And then obviously the value of that piece of your land has gone down extremely because you no longer have access to it along with your home, or you may not have access to it to grow your crops or raise your animals that you're raising if you're a farmer doing that type of thing. So major concerns there, obviously. And almost certainly, as you can imagine, with a track that runs so long and has to be very straight and can't have many curves in it, at least quick curves, has to go very straight over long distances because of the speeds of the trains. Obviously, there's going to be times when they'll have to run it probably right through houses, maybe through small towns, and certainly through farmland and other types of rural landscapes. There aren't always going to be options to avoid those things, just as there aren't going to be options to avoid significant natural heritage features. And seeing as this is sort of touted as a green energy project by the federal government, I would like to know if anyone has done a detailed survey and assessment of the actual climate change impacts that this project will produce. And to do that, you would have to be gathering information on the amounts of clearing that's done, how many square acres. Well, I've already done that. I've already estimated that here, but how much woodland is going to be taken away, how much grassland, how much wetland is going to be filled in, how much significant wildlife habitat is going to be lost. Then comes the amounts of raw materials you need, from gravel, concrete, steel. All these things have to be assessed and added up. The fuel for the hundreds of vehicles that are going to be involved in creating this thing, from the initial clearing of the land to the modification of the landscape to accept the tracks, to the fence erection, to the train station erections. All those things are going to have to be added up and calculated, because in the end I think those impacts would probably far outweigh the impacts that continued driving by people as they are today to these various centers is having on the landscape. And especially when you consider that probably in the near future many more people will be driving electric cars anyhow. So in that regard, theoretically, impacts from carbon should be going down just by more people switching to EV vehicles. And until that's done, I don't think people can make valued assessments indicating that this will be a net positive for climate change. And what about the impacts on local towns along the roadways now that may have a lot less traffic going by them if more and more people simply take this high-speed train? They will lose tourism dollars, they will lose dollars from local citizens that maybe can't get to their stores very easily anymore because the tracks have been severing roads out in the country, all those types of things. Just moving the businesses away from these small local towns. Okay, those are some of the concerns that I have, along with many others in the local area. Now I'm going to just provide some comments on what I think the project needs to look at, and maybe some other comments about the design of the project and stuff if it ends up having to go ahead. Firstly, I believe all lands affected or potentially affected by this project need to be scanned for natural heritage features to see if any natural heritage features of significance exist. That includes things like I've mentioned, significant woodlands, wetlands, provincially significant wildlife habitat, species at risk. All those features need to be assessed, or should be assessed, lest we risk losing more of them into the future. As I mentioned earlier, I think there needs to be a very solid justification for the need of this project. It's one thing to say, well, our population's going to grow and we're going to need more transportation, but we need to see some data that really supports that thousands of people are going to opt for this method of travel in the future in southern Ontario and Quebec, just going from city to city. Also, reiterating my earlier point, there needs to be a comparative evaluation of the impacts of this project compared to the impacts of people continuing to drive their vehicles as they are doing now. And there has been a lot of commentary around the Via Rail service that exists today. Obviously there are some problems with it with respect to speed and delays and things like that, but maybe that would be a better focus of efforts and money, to simply perhaps create a new track that the Via Rail trains can go on by themselves instead of constantly sharing it with freight trains that delay passenger trains and whatnot. And at this point, I obviously have no idea about the companies involved in building this project if it goes ahead, but I would push for most of the infrastructure, as much as possible, should be built in Canada, including the trains themselves. Let's not bid this overseas somewhere so some other country can build it all for us. And to comment here on the design of the project again, the biggest problem with this project as it is the fragmentation of lands, not only from a natural perspective, but also from the human perspective. The natural perspective, it's fragmenting habitats, some of them significant. It's potentially filling in wetlands, acreages and acreages of wetlands, which we can't afford to lose under climate change. We can't afford to lose any greenery really at all. But then from a human perspective, the dissection of roads, the dead ending of roads, the cutting across private lands and splitting them in two to make them harder to access. That could be alleviated, like in many other countries, if this project goes ahead, by building the system on elevated pedestals or piers and putting it up 25 or 30 feet in the air, and therefore the track system doesn't have to dissect roads. It doesn't have to fill in swamps. You can put piers on the edges of the swamps perhaps, or several piers out in the middle of the swamps instead of filling the whole swamp or lake in. And just as a final comment, I guess I would just say that if the federal government was really serious about climate change impacts, they would greatly reduce the amount of immigration into Canada. And I'm not against immigrants at all. I'm not racist. I'm not that way at all. I know I'm an immigrant from way back. But we can't keep bringing in 300,000 to 500,000 people a year without major impacts on local communities, shortages of housing and things like that. And if we, like most countries, greatly reduced our immigration rates, that would help our young people of today find jobs more readily and better paying jobs, because there'd be less competition for them. Bringing in hundreds of thousands of people a year requires communities to try and find housing for these people. All the infrastructure and consumption related to this added load of people every year also creates negative impacts regarding to climate change. To get ourselves actually more in line with other countries, and yes, we're a big country and it seems like we should be able to accept tons and tons of people, but all the congestion comes down into the already built up areas. So that's a brief summary of the project as I know it. And again, as I mentioned, I could have some of the facts wrong, but I think they're generally correct. Nice to see this trail opening up a bit at least. So nice to feel the solid ground under your feet again after a long snowy winter of deep snows and ice.